Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Banterweight. As always, I'm Zach, and with me is Braden Holden. How's it going, guys?
I'm good, man. Thanks for asking.
It's good.
Good, thanks.
Today we're just going to be discussing and doing a bit of a preview of UFC 262, which is just the Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira. Um, we've seen a bunch of pretty sick cards recently, and they just keep coming. But I think this is one of the ones that I'm most hyped for. You've got Chandler and Oliveira for the newly vacated lightweight championship. Oliveira's coming off a massive victory over Tony Ferguson, continues his 8-fight win streaks, which spans over 3 years. Then, on the other side, we have the former 2-time Bellator champion, Michael Chandler, who's coming off of a pretty impressive KO victory over Dan Hooker. But before we get into the co-main of this card, I just kind of wanted to go through the main card itself to see what you guys think of the fights. So basically, starting off the main card, we've got Shane Burgos versus Edson Barboza. I think this could possibly be a fight of the night potential. What do you guys think?
I think, I think I would agree with you there. We know Burgos has the cardio to make it an absolute war, to kind of never to go down. And Barbosa is a seasoned vet. I think he knows not to. A lot of Burgos opponents that we've seen have kind of gassed themselves out early, and then we see Burgos come on strong. A big example of that is Mirkwani. But uh, Barboza is going to be smarter. He's going to be smarter with his utilization of his energy, and I think that's really going to help him in that fight. But that's a fight I'm super excited for. And Barboza looks amazing at featherweight.
Yeah, and he's actually just coming off I think they just re-signed him again for another 6 fights too. So he's fresh. He's got that new money, so I'm sure he's in it.
Yeah.
What do you think, Braden?
I 100% agree that that's probably the front runner for fight of the night. And I think Barboza, not that people are forgetting about him, but he's 1-1 in the new weight class, but realistically that very well could have been 2-0 because the first one was a very controversial decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and just looking at his skills, his last fight was probably the best version of Edson that we've seen in a long time, right? So I don't know. I think he's reinvented himself. I think even though he's been around for a long time, he's a guy that people need to start watching now for sure.
Yeah. Moving on the card, or up the card, I guess. We do have another fun one. I guess all of these fights are pretty fun, but we've got the Jack Hermansson versus Edmund Shabazian. Hermansson's coming off a loss to Marvin Vettori, I think a year or so back. And we haven't seen Shabazian fight since he got his first loss, actually, to Derek Brunson. So I don't know. I think this is a pretty interesting fight to kind of get the middleweight, like mid rankings moving a bit. It's going to be interesting to see if Shabazian can actually come back from his loss and be better than he was before, or kind of have that loss lingering in his mind.
Yeah, I think this is because those guys are both kind of middle of the middleweight division. I think middleweight division has a lot of good guys at the top, but kind of right around Darren Till, anybody under that kind of just turns into a prospect in that division or somebody that's kind of been there for a while. You got like Kelvin Gastelum occupying that area, and then you got these two guys occupying that area, and I think Hermansson, and no disrespect to him, I think he's an incredible fighter, but I think that's kind of his area where he's going to stay for most of his career. Be kind of like a Kelvin Gastelum guy, have shots at the top, but never really kind of get championship level. I think this will be a moment to prove if Shabazian's a true prospect or not. Because this would be a big win for him for sure, especially after kind of getting mauled by Derek Brunson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think he really does need this win. A lot of people are really high on this kid right before that Derek Brunson fight, and it took a little bit of the steam away from him. I'm always a little bit, I don't know, curious about those guys that come out of is it Glendale or Glenview?
Glendale,
Edmund Tavardian school, just because of his history with a couple of his bigger prospects, right? So it'll be interesting because he's a homegrown guy from there, right? Like he came up pretty young. But Jack Hermansson's tricky. Regardless of like where you think they are in terms of like skill, Jack Hermansson's one of those guys who can like pull something out that no one saw coming. You know what I mean? His striking is very awkward. He can dive for those really quick heel hooks like he did against Kelvin. Like he's very I would say one of his strengths is being unpredictable, right? So
Yeah.
it's hard to necessarily call what's going to happen in this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, a need to win for Hermanson if he wants to kind of keep going up. But I mean, Shabazian, he's only 23, so I mean, his career in the UFC and just fighting in general is still very, very young, right? So, I mean,
He's only had 12 fights.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, if he does win, that's insane, really good for him. But if he does get that loss, it's just more experience that he's going to learn from, right? But I would say that. Sorry,
He is coming up
continue.
very, very quick, right? Because we just said 12 fights, but just a few fights ago, it was the Ultimate Fighter and then Dana White's Contender Series, right? So
Yeah,
his experience in the big game is actually very small compared to these guys like Jack Hermanson and like the other guys at the in the top 10 of the division.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see. I'm not really sure who takes that one. I'm kind of leaning towards Hermanson just from experience and just how awkward he is, like you were saying, Braden. But I'm pretty excited for it, is for sure, though. Now moving on, I guess, to the co-main already, which is a big one. Originally, it was supposed to be the Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards. Something happened in Diaz's camp where I think he injured his back or like had back spasms or something like that. So that's being pushed to 263, which I think is the Adesanya Vittori fight.
Yep.
But in its place, we do have the Tony Ferguson and Benilderius. We see Ferguson on a 2-fight skid. And then Benil coming off a super big win over Diego Ferreira. Tony's definitely going to be Benil's toughest opponent. Ferguson looks like he's taking his training seriously. He's training effectively. What do you guys think is going to be the outcome this time?
Definitely a difficult one to call, right? Tony Ferguson's a little bit of an outlier right now because he looked unstoppable for so long, but in his last couple, like there's been a big drop in success. I wouldn't say a drop in how he performed because I think he actually did very well in the Gaethje fight. It's just that Gaethje's that good, and then
Mm-hmm.
also, Oliveira is also just that good. We saw Tony Ferguson struggle a little bit with Kevin Lee's wrestling, but then Oliveira is like another step to that how good grapplers can get. So it's hard to tell like if Tony Ferguson's taking a step off or if it was just the style matchups that were inevitably going to come and he was going to fall from that. But this is a kind of a do or die fight for him, right? Because he's on 2-fight win streak or 2-fight losing streak. In order to stay in like that sort of top of the division, like he really needs this, and like there's so much backing to it. He spent all those years on that win streak. For him to now lose his spot in the top of the division, like there's a lot riding on that. Benilderius is also a guy who's been around for a long time, and he's had more of an up and down career. But like this is his shot, right? This is the best chance he's gotten to kind of get towards like that contender area, right? So this fight means a lot to both of them. I don't necessarily know who I would call, but it's definitely a big one.
Yeah.
I think I agree with Braden. I think this fight's a big fight, and I don't know who to give it to just because Tony Ferguson, as of late, hasn't. I feel it's a disservice to him to say he hasn't looked as good as he has been because he fought two opponents that are just two of the gamest guys in that division, right? And it shows with Oliveira fighting for the belt, and Gaethje had the interim belt. Dariush, his striking has really started to evolve from when he started off in the UFC. And I think if Tony Ferguson underestimates that, because I feel like on the ground, Tony Ferguson is crafty enough to kind of get away in those scrambles. But we also saw that Oliveira was able to, when he was able to contain him, he was able to put in some serious work on the ground. So it's a very interesting fight. I feel like both guys can do up and down. I give Tony the edge in the striking, but I give Benil the edge on the ground for sure.
Yeah, the thing with Benil is his striking has definitely improved, and I think he has a better technical understanding now. But he doesn't have that smoothness or fluidity that Tony's had, just because he's been
Yeah.
more of a better striker for longer, right? Like Tony's been
Yeah.
one of the I wouldn't say the most technical boxers, but he's been a very comfortable boxer for a lot of his career, even though he is so good on the ground, right?
Yeah, he's working with Freddie Roach for this camp too. So
Yeah, exactly. So even
Yeah.
though Dariush, I think, has gotten better technically and he has a better understanding of the striking game now, there's like a comfortability and a fluidity that Tony is going to have an advantage in for sure.
Yeah, I think Benil is kind of underrated though, just in general. I mean, you can't forget that he is on a 6-fight win streak. So I mean, I'm looking at it now, and almost every single one of them is by finish as well, which is pretty impressive. Are they the same caliber opponents that Tony's faced? No. So I do believe it's going to be a tough fight for him, but I do believe it's definitely can't count him out, right? Even on the ground, I mean, it's not like he doesn't know anything on the ground. He is a black belt in BJJ.
Dariush?
He is, yeah.
Dariush is great on the ground. He's probably one of the better like submission grapplers in that division right now, I would say.
And then even his stand, he's just kind of pretty solid overall, right? Like he does have the experience in Muay Thai under Rafael Cordero as well, because he does fight at at King's MMA. So it's gonna be interesting to see. I think it'll be a pretty big fight for both of them. More so, I'm thinking Ferguson because he's kind of on that 2-fight skid. So it'd be interesting to see kind of what happens there.
I don't think we should discount the fact though that I think it's a big fight for Ferguson because of the cut implications. But like Braden said, this really is the biggest fight of Benilderius' career. And if you add a guy, especially let's say best case scenario a finish, if you add a finish of someone like Tony Ferguson to your resume, like you look at Tony Ferguson, he's beat everybody. Who has he lost to? Oliveira, who's on a 8-fight win streak, and Justin Gagey, who is just violence personified. And then since he went to Trevor Whitman, he's looked incredible. So I think personally this is a bigger fight for Benilderius because if he adds Tony Ferguson's name to his repertoire with a 7-fight win streak, then we start talking about title shot implications.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. I think it's going to be a really fun one to watch. It's going to be interesting to kind of see how that plays out. But before we go on to the main event, I just wanted to get your opinions on something else, kind of with regards to the championship, since it is vacated. That's just the whole concept of Dustin Poirier choosing to fight McGregor over whoever for the belt. Do you think his route to kind of make more money, get that trilogy win, is a good choice? Do you think it's a bad choice? Do you think it definitely could have been done better? What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, Braden, I'll let you go first.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Most Canadian thing ever. I listening to Dustin Poirier on Ariel Helwani's podcast, DC and Helwani. He said some pretty cool things, and he talked about how he never wanted to just be handed the belt. He didn't want the belt after he fought Connor. He didn't want to be handed it. Like that was never in the explanation. That was never in the question for him. And he said he wants to fight somebody for the belt. He wants to fight the champ for the belt. He truly believes he's the number one contender and that he always will be the number one contender. But he doesn't view himself as champ. So I think he wants to get the Connor fight out of the way and win the belt actually off of somebody. I don't think he wants to go for a vacant title in the way he was speaking on Helwani. And I think that just as much as money kind of weighs into it for him.
And I know, Braden, I feel like I'm pretty sure you have kind of opposite point of view. So,
well, yeah. So, I typically lean towards the I don't want to say purist, but like the reason I care about MMA is because I want to see who the best fighter is, right? And I feel like for the most part, that's what everybody feels. But then, obviously money and business is a part needed to make the sport thrive and continue to be there, right? For Dustin, hearing him talk before the Conor McGregor fight, saying this is where I get entered into the history books, because especially the lightweight division has been so defined by basically Conor and Khabib for so long. It's almost like that Ali, George Foreman, and Joe Frazier sort of like triangle, and Dustin being able to beat Conor to him kind of felt like he would be cemented in that history. I feel like getting the belt is just like that last thing that he needs. Like they've all had the belt except even though he's had the interim belt, uh like DP getting the belt is what would basically solidify his career. Um and listening to him talk before the Conor fight, that was kind of the mindset that he also had. And the thing is, if he were to choose the belt now, that Conor trilogy will always be there. Even if Conor kept losing and still maintained his stardom, the fact that they were 1-1 could always be used to sell that fight later on down the line. If DP goes in there and loses to Conor, he may never get a shot at that belt again. And even if he didn't want to win it out of a vacant title, that would just mean that the next fight again would be his crowning, right? Like his first defense, which would be the same timeline as him now. If he gets a title shot after McGregor, he would basically become a legitimate champion in his eyes around the same time and the same number of fights. So the thing is, I feel like it would have been smarter for him to get the belt, and then that Conor fight would still be around. Taking the Conor fight doesn't guarantee that the belt will eventually still be there for him afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you, but I do believe that even if, say, him and Conor fight doesn't go Dustin's way, I still think Dustin only needs that one more win, and then he will get the title shot, right?
But think about who he's fighting, though, because if Conor gets that win, then suddenly, I don't want to say casuals, but there's a population of people that are then going to be getting, wow, Conor's back. Conor's now in the title picture again. You know what I mean? And the UFC, like I said, because you need the money in the business to thrive, that's now going to then be pushed above DP, I think.
No, I do agree that if Conor does end up winning that Dustin Poirier fight, I'm almost certain that he'll then fight for the lightweight belt the next fight after. But yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know. Fighter pay is always an issue, and fighters getting paid what they think they deserve is always an issue. And DP just started a new charity organization, and I agree with you in the sense that I want to find out who the best martial artist is. I disagree with you in the sense that Conor fight is always there. I don't think that Conor fight's always there, especially not for the money that it's there for right now. This is fresh in people's minds. This is fresh in the casual fans' minds and everything like that. Once DP goes, let's say it's him fighting Oliveira for the belt, and let's say he wins. And let's say Conor goes off and fights, I don't know, who would Conor fight at that time? Let's say they make it like a money fight situation and make him fight like a Nate Diaz or someone like that. Conor becomes less legitimate in the eyes of the title picture. And the way he becomes less legitimate in the eyes of the title picture makes it far less feasible that the UFC would make that fight. So that fight would have to happen after Dustin Poirier is champion. And then after Dustin Poirier is champion, that fight's lost all that value. So I think Dustin Poirier is getting in at the good time when the fight has value.
Okay, I agree with you there. I do have two things just to use as like devil's advocate.
Yeah.
So just one thing to think about is you automatically will make a higher amount of money when you're the champion, because in the contract, belt holders get a higher percentage or they get a higher bonus on top of it. However, whatever the contract actually is.
Yep.
When DP is a belt holder, he makes more money than if he wasn't. So if he were to fight Conor for the title eventually, there's also that to consider. If he's coming in as the champion, therere's also going to be
But do you think Conor
financial
genuinely
implications there.
fights for the title again?
Well,
If he wins, I think. Like if he,
I'm taking
Yeah,
remove DP from the picture. Let's say this trilogy fight is not happening, and Oliveira is fighting Dustin Poirier, not Chandler. Who, do you think Conor gets back to that title picture?
if I had to make a solid prediction, I would not say that I'm convinced that he would make it to the title picture, but I'm not convinced that there's no chance that he would. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot that
It's
can
less
happen,
of
right?
a chance than the sure money now. That
Yeah.
chance is too small to risk what should be the highest pay-per-view of the year.
Okay. So here's the other thing that I wanted to point out in my like devil's advocate sort of argument, right? So let's say DP goes on and he has a very long championship career, which, like you said, would then bar the Connor fight because Connor wouldn't get into that contender spot, right? Then DP's so dominant that you could have those super fights like we've seen other champions do. Remember, Anderson Silva went up to light heavyweight 2 or 3 times during his reign because there were super fights and he was being so dominant. So if we see DP keep the title that long, there is always still going to be that opportunity for a super fight outside of putting the title on the line for the champion. On the other hand, do you think DP sticks around as the champion for a very prolonged amount of time?
Very decent, I think.
I think after Connor fight,
Mm-hmm.
I think 4 fights remain in his career. He has been very vocal about how much he dislikes the fighting process.
I believe he
And-
just signed an 8-fight contract
Yeah.
though, and he did say that eventually he was going to go up and finish his career off at welterweight, is what he said on Joe Rogan at least.
I think the 8 fight was
But
signed after McGregor, right? So it's like his next
so
fight would be
8 fights starting now.
Yeah.
oh, okay. Well, then I think he'll fight out this contract and retire. I'm not going to pull a Zach Young and say that he's going to retire after every fight.
How dare you?
But I would say watch the Helwani broadcast, and like his broadcasts are always amazing. He asks really good questions, and Poirier was talking about fighting at welterweight, and he was like, he's like, I'm walking around at 178. He's like, I look big. He's like, but it's becoming more of a question now because you look at the top welterweights, and those guys are like walking around 200 and everything like that. Like, they're big guys, and it's not like DP's not a big guy. He's got broad shoulders. He's a pretty solid build and a pretty big lightweight. I would say
SpongeBob body, as he said.
Yeah, he looks like a door, man, but he's a door built from fucking steel, right? So good for him. But
Dustin the Door Poirier.
I think he's a big lightweight, but he's not. He doesn't show to me like a sizable welterweight. I think he finishes out his career at lightweight, personally.
I'm gonna disagree. I think he finishes at welterweight, but I think you have a point that there are guys that are just too big for his frame at welterweight. So, there's not a lot for DP to accomplish anymore, right? If he gets the belt, there's basically, like he's done it all. He's one of those guys.
Champ, right?
Other than double champ, but he's one of those guys that he has that Michael Bisping like long career. There's no shortcuts for him, right? If he gets the belt, there isn't a lot more to prove. So if he goes up to welterweight, I see him probably looking for legacy fights, big fights against guys that aren't necessarily those, between welterweight, middleweight champions. But that's when you have those Conor McGregor fights. He won't fight Jorge Masvidal because obviously they're training partners. He's kind of another Nate Diaz. That fight was booked before, and he's now a welterweight. That's basically a lightweight who weighs in at welterweight. And those fights are always going to be there for DP if he wants to go up after his lightweight career is over.
The Nate Diaz fight makes more money than the Conor fight, I think.
Against
in the future, the Diaz fight makes more money than the Conor fight.
I don't know if I agree with that, especially if he loses to Leon next month.
It depends very heavily on how Conor, I guess, performs, and obviously with Conor fighting Dustin Poirier, but also like take into account. Let's see if Conor loses to Dustin Poirier, his value is going to drop tremendously. But value in the UFC, not value as a businessman. He's rich as all things. But, his value is going to drop in the UFC. If Dustin Poirier went for the belt, Conor, his value drops. I know we're diving pretty deep into this devil's advocate, but I think now's the right time to fight Conor because Conor's value is going to drop over time. And I think there's guys. I think his best matchup in the top 5 is against Chandler, but I think everybody else in the top 5 has a favorable matchup against Conor McGregor right now.
Sorry, say that again. So do you think Conor has it's favorable for Conor against Chandler and everybody else is favorable over McGregor? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I would say.
Really?
I don't know if
interesting. Because I thought
Chandler would
be tough for Conor as a wrestler.
Shorter shorter orthodox wrestlers seem to kind of be the way that
But
we look at his opponents and his most impressive victories, it's over shorter orthodox wrestlers with powerful hands.
he's not that much shorter though. He's only an inch shorter. He's only 5'9". He's not like he's a Chad Mendes or anything. Because I'm assuming that's who you're basing that off of, is the Chad Mendes. Because I think Connor's only 5'10", I think, isn't he?
I think he's 5'9", actually.
I thought he was 5'9".
Yeah, so if that's the case, him and Chandler are the exact same size.
Chandler's 5'9".
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to see, right? Because he's broader.
Yeah,
But he is. I think he has pretty short arms and short. Like
I
he
always
is
thought
like
he was a shorter guy for some reason, but
No, I'll double
he has
check
a weird
here for you,
stature.
but-
I'm pretty sure he has like short legs, short arms. Not to roast Michael Chandler, but like there's some of those body types where you're tall, but just the way that you're, like your leg height versus your torso height, like it makes you seem kind of shorter.
yeah,
And just the fact that he's so built, like he's so thick that like
yeah.
Sorry,
I feel
Michael,
bad. We haven't even talked about Michael Chandler versus Oliveira.
we're getting there. We're getting there. Don't worry.
Yeah.
5'8", Michael Chandler, and then Connor's 5'9", so not very much difference.
But then in that case, I would say everybody in the top 5 has an edge over Connor.
I mean, I would disagree, and I would actually go the other way. I think the people who would be more inclined to have a range fight like Gaethje and Connor. I think Connor, he's technical enough. He looked good in that DP fight up until those leg kicks kind of took a toll on him. But yeah, I think guys that are going to be relentless in kind of the grappling section is going to be difficult for Connor, like Khabib was, which is where Chandler shines, right? But I think people like Gaethje, Connor has a little bit of an advantage against. I think Tony Ferguson
too.
He is relentless, but in a different way. He's not gonna like grab and control you. He's gonna try to overwhelm you with his forward striking, but he takes damage in the process. And if you give Connor that space to cause damage, that's very dangerous.
Like look against Tony Ferguson, He's been able to keep up that pressure after being with Trevor Whitman, being able to keep up that pressure for 5 full rounds, or almost full rounds, because the TKO. But for 5 rounds, he went against Tony Ferguson with great pressure and barely got hit against Tony Ferguson, a guy that.
Well, okay, it's hard to say he barely got hit though. It's just that he was doing way more damage every time he landed than Tony was. He got dropped by Tony in the second round, right? And so like the opportunities to get hurt were there for Gaethje. Like there were openings, even though he looked way better than he used to. The openings were there, and against Connor, that's particularly dangerous. I think Connor also has an advantage over
but the way
Tony because of his wild striking as well.
The way Gaethje moves, the pressure he puts on, and the leg kicks that he brings to the table against a guy like Conor McGregor, who's so movement based, is also super influential in that fight. And I think Gaethje could overpressure Connor.
I'm not saying that he couldn't. I'm not saying that he couldn't, but
and win the fight. And I think that's more favorable than Connor just looking for his perfect shot after being gone for like 2 years.
I mean, so I'm not disagreeing that Connor has this massive advantage over these guys, but I'm just saying that I think there are openings for Connor against these guys that aren't necessarily there for a guy like Chandler, who's gonna pick his power double, his relentless wrestling against Connor, where those openings aren't necessarily there.
I think Connor's really good at defending the initial shot. Where Connor kind of falters is chain wrestling, and I think chain wrestling by itself is insanely hard to defend, and especially when you're against a guy like Khabib, he's going to show any flaws in your takedown defense game. But even then, Connor looked good on the initial shots on Khabib, and we've talked about this before, how Chandler isn't a chain wrestler. He's a big initial shooter. He's a big power shooter. So, and I think that actually favors Connor.
Okay, that's a good point. I agree that his style of wrestling is better suited to Connor's defense. I'm trying to go back to the original question. So then, you think the only route for Connor to potentially get back to the title then is if he has to go through Chandler? Because just like that statement in itself is difficult for me to like agree with.
I just think that right now, with where Connor is, and the way we've seen him fight in his last fights, and the way that there's more footage on him out there. He's not this top rising shooting star prospect anymore. This is a guy that people, and if you're in that division, I think subconsciously at all times you're preparing for Conor McGregor. You know that's a money fight. You know that he calls out anybody in the division. And Paul Felder talked about it. He was like, he called me out when I wasn't even ranked just to get under my skin, just to get in my head. So I think there's always subconsciously you're looking at Conor McGregor, and there's been faults exposed in his game. And I think when you got guys as good as Dustin Poirier, when you got guys that under Trevor Whitman can make amazing game plans like Justin Gaethje can right now, I think Oliveira's jiu-jitsu is too good for Conor's jiu-jitsu. Too good for Conor. I think Tony Ferguson is way too unpredictable.
See, that's the one I
And,
think I would disagree with most. I feel like, especially after that Gaethje fight, their openings and Tony striking that would be especially dangerous for Conor. And he's not necessarily a guy who, even though he's a good wrestler, he's not a guy who's known for being able to, chain wrestle either. You know what I mean?
yeah, I kind of see Tony Ferguson, Conor going like kind of like Max Holloway, Conor McGregor, but I think Tony Ferguson has uh good cardio. I think he definitely hits a lot harder than Max Holloway. Well, I guess that's subjective, but he definitely knocks out more people than Max Holloway does, and I think he has a very slick jiu-jitsu game. He gets in, he uses his Imanari rolls quite well. He isolates legs, and McGregor leaves his legs right out there. His lead leg is right there for the picking. I think if you got like a Ryan Hall or somebody like that, they would be, licking their lips looking at it.
Yeah. Anyways, so let's go. Let's move on to the actual main event. It's going to be an interesting one. Obviously, the Michael Chandler, Charles Oliveira fighting for the vacant lightweight belt. Jesus. After just kind of looking up a bunch of stuff last night, I stumbled upon that video with MMA on Point that Chandler did before his fight with Hooker. Basically, he just ranked the top 10 lightweights, said how he could beat them, type thing. So I was just gonna bring up what he said about Oliveira and have you guys kind of see what you think about it. But basically, Chandler said his biggest fear was the first round with Oliveira. He felt that the first round's gonna be always most dangerous just because there's not much sweat. So that's going to be easier for submissions. You can't really slide out of them. He also believed that Oliveira does have a little more striking than he does. And he also said that his confidence in his hands can be dangerous. But basically, he just said that Oliveira lacks discipline. So in that way, he missed weight. I don't know if it was more than once. But I mean, if you don't have the discipline to make the weight, he said that you're the type of guy to kind of give up on yourself during a fight. So basically, it was just his overall game plan was kind of bringing him into deep waters, making him give up on himself. What do you guys think of that?
I think that's a pretty smart game plan from what we've seen historically from Oliveira. I think, did you say that he said that he has no dedication? He has no
Discipline.
He has no discipline. Yeah. I think, if you look at Oliveira's last, 8 fights, I think you can tell the guy's pretty disciplined. I think that's a bit of an overstatement on Michael Chandler's part. But I think definitely, especially when you look at him versus Paul Felder, I think that's a good example of dragging Oliveira deep into a fight, and Oliveira kind of, you could see, gave up on himself in the fight. Whether it was, his cardio and he was too tired and he gave up on himself, or whether it was he just mentally wasn't there. But so I think it's a game plan that's shown to work in the past. I don't know if it will work again, but it's been shown to work.
Yeah.
How about you, Bryn?
I also think that saying that he's not disciplined is a bit of a stretch. And the weight cut thing, like, the thing with Oliveira, he's been around for so long. He's kind of pretty much grew up in the UFC and he's gone through weight classes. I think there was a point where he was at featherweight still and he really shouldn't have been at featherweight anymore. He was aging, growing. It happens, right? And so there was kind of a weird period where he should have maybe gone up to lightweight a little bit sooner. And I think that's part of the weight cut thing. Yeah, Oliveira. Yeah, I think it's smart to take him into the deep waters because there has been times where he's faded. I wouldn't say he gave up on himself, but he's definitely faded. But yeah, I don't necessarily agree with Chandler saying that he's like talking about him being kind of mentally weak.
On the other side, I just literally just found a couple things that Oliveira said about how he's going to beat Chandler. See if you agree with this a little more. I'm getting this from MMAfighting.com just to put it out there, but Oliveira did say that, and like in quote, all he has is a heavy hand, a heavy punch. I'm complete on the feet and complete on the ground. The only thing he has better than me is wrestling, but I'll use my jiu-jitsu if he tries to wrestle me, so it makes no difference to me. He also states throughout the article that he does respect Chandler, respects his power, but he's just gonna walk forward the entire time. And he says that if Chandler attempts to throw, that he's just gonna eat a counter. So I guess his game plan is kind of relying more on his, I guess, jiu-jitsu and then his striking, which we do know that it definitely has evolved from what it used to be. And even Chandler acknowledged that too, right? But
yeah, I think
you take this one. You gave me the last one.
Yeah, I think like Chandler's striking is very basic, but you have to respect it because there are fight-ending implications to every strike he throws. He throws basically with full power every time he throws, and they're short, they're sharp, and they're technical, but it's just a very basic toolkit of what he has on the feet. So I agree that Charles, he has more to go off of. Like there's more things he can do when they're in that area, but you 100% have to respect the fact that any one of Chandler's shots can put you out. Jiu-jitsu and wrestling, it doesn't always necessarily translate to, if he uses my wrestling, I'll just use my jiu-jitsu to counter it. It really depends all on positional stuff. If Chandler ends up getting him in awkward positions against the cage where, submissions are more difficult, then obviously Chandler's jiu-jitsu won't mean as much as if say they're like maybe in the middle of the mat and it's down to more traditional experience positions that Charles would have worked on throughout his whole very jiu-jitsu heavy MMA career, right? Like it's always going to come to like very specifics when you're just pitting those two very opposite grappling styles together. So yeah, it's interesting. I think Oliveira's kind of putting on a little bit of the way he gave that statement sounds a little bit cocky, but not necessarily wrong. I think fundamentally he does see where he's stronger and where he has an advantage, but you got to respect the fact that anything from Chandler can be fight finishing in like one shot.
And you bring up the whole, like, it could be a cocky statement. To add to that, which I just read and I kind of think it might be, but he did say that basically every wrestler that he's fought took him down and he was able to finish it on the mat. So for example, Will Brooks came over from Bellator, was a wrestler, primarily a wrestler. Oliveira took him down, caught him. So yeah, he kind of states that every wrestler that he's fought, he's beaten. But then again, he doesn't take into consideration the wrestlers that he has beat compared to Chandler as a fighter. Because I do believe that Chandler is a better fighter than most of the people that Charles has beat, right?
Will Brooks is a weird one because Will Brooks has 2 or 3 wins over Chandler, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably why he was bringing it up too, right?
Yeah.
I think Oliveira, I agree with Brayden that it comes off a bit cocky. I agree with Brayden that you have to respect Chandler's power. Chandler is really good at getting inside guys' guards to land those short power shots that Brayden was talking about. And he's really good at using head and body movement, just like he did against Dan Hooker, to kind of lower his body and look like it's going for a takedown to set up those heavy power shots in the overhand where like that when you look at the Hooker fight, he used his head movement to draw his hands down and then came over, right? So I think, just saying that, he's going to come in, I'm going to catch him with a counter, I think it's definitely easier said than done, because talked about a counter wrestler style. Dan Hooker is very good at catching wrestlers as they come in with counter knees and counter shots, and most notably his counter knees. And Chandler knocked him out. So I think that's an important thing to note. I also think an important thing to note is we know Chandler works very well from the guard. And I'm not saying this like, Oliveira's jiu-jitsu wouldn't be able to do anything. I'm saying this as Chandler's not a novice out there. He's not, a wrestler that's going to be over aggressive and give up his arms, give up his neck for easy submissions. He's a guy that's been in MMA for a while. He's fought against high-level jiu-jitsu guys in the octagon before. Benson Henderson has a high-level jiu-jitsu, and he was tossing him around like he was nothing. Now, once again, that's a Benson Henderson that's not as, not as good as he once was, but Benson Henderson does have good level jiu-jitsu. Not Oliveira level, but still good level. And it's just important to note that Chandler works very well from the guard, and he does have very punishing ground and pound, and it builds up very quickly over time. A good fight to note for that is the fight that he had in Bellator against Yamaguchi, I want to say his name is.
Yamauchi.
Yamauchi, yeah. He was incredible in the guard in that fight and dealt out so much damage. It kind of looked like George St. Pierre in the guard. Like it was quite good. It was constant pressure. Any chance that Yamauchi had to stand up or do anything was just completely negated. And just like Braden said, in a positional battle, he had him up against the cage, and he was using that very well. He was using that very well to his advantage to make that ground and pound work for him and make that position work for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just before we wrap it up here, I kind of want to do a lightning speed picks for the main card. So I'll say the fight, both of you guys say who you think are going to win. See how good we do this week. Lately hasn't been so good, but let's try it. So first, starting off the main card, we'll do Shane Burgos versus Edson Barboza. Holden, who do you think is going to win?
I think Barboza is going to win. I think watching Burgos' fights in preparation for this podcast made me kind of realize that there's holes in his game. I think Edson's better on the ground than Burgos is. And I think Edson's leg kicks really add up over time. And the more I watch Burgos' fights, nobody's really looked to kind of attack his lower body, attack his legs, take away his movement in the latter rounds. So I think that'll be an interesting tactic to use for Edson.
All right, what about you, Braden?
I agree. I'm going with Barboza. I think especially someone like Shane Burgos. I think the speed and the experience are going to make the difference.
Yeah. So then Jack Hermanson, Edmund Shabazian, Holden.
I think this is probably one of the most unpredictable fights on the card. I personally give it to Shabazian. I think the kid's going to be, he's older than me. I think he's going to be a really good prospect. I hope he learned the right lessons from his loss against Derek Brunson.
Mm-hmm. Braden?
I'm going to go with Jack Hermanson. I think he has more tools, and something unpredictable is going to happen, and Shabazian isn't going to have the experience to overcome it.
Yeah, I realized I didn't even pick for the first fight, but I'm going to agree with you guys, Barboza, and then for this one, I'm going to agree with Braden with Jack Hermanson. Moving on, co-main, Tony Ferguson and Benilderius. Holden?
This is another hard fight to call. I think Tony Ferguson wins. I think his experience on the feet, his unpredictability on the feet, and I think his scramble ability is really going to save him in this fight. And I think Dariush is going to have to try and look for moments in those scrambles to kind of isolate joints early on in the fight. But I think if this fight stays on the feet, Tony Ferguson definitely wins.
Braden?
I could see Darius doing something similar to Oliveira with his very, very solid and fundamental jiu-jitsu, but I also see him getting cut up in the process and potentially getting finished. So I'm going to lean Tony Ferguson just by that much.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to go Tony Ferguson. I think he's going to get a win back. I think he's going to probably have a few more wins afterwards, hopefully, which would be nice. But to finish off the card, we have the Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler fight for the belt. Holden.
I think Michael Chandler gets it done. I'm a big fan of Michael Chandler. I've been a big fan of his since Bellator. So there's definitely a bias there. I will admit that, but I'm also a big Oliveira fan and what Oliveira's done. And I think I really think this is a good match. Lightweight's a division of killers, and whoever Dustin Poirier faces, I think Dustin Poirier can kind of be. Oh, I say Dustin Poirier. Whoever wins this fight, the next title holder is. I think, and Braid. I know Braden's going to disagree with this, but I think they should be reviewed. They should be viewed as a legitimate champion. That's a heavy division, and that's a heavy fight right at the top of it.
Yeah. Braden, who do you have?
I'm going to go with Oliveira. I think the experience in the UFC is going to make a difference, and I also think Oliveira just has more potential ways to win. I think the amount of tools that he has in the shed is going to put him over the top.
Yeah, I'm gonna lean towards Chandler. I think, like Holden was saying, I've been a pretty big fan of his since his Bellator days. So I think he's definitely going to be able to pull off the win. And yeah, so that concludes the whole fight card for UFC 262. Our thoughts, opinions, everything like that. So hope you guys enjoyed watching. We'll see you next time.